You're listening to Unhooked. My guest today is David Chambers. As a men's dating, relationships, and intimacy coach, coaching men for over a decade, David guides men to build deep emotional connections, self-confidence, and experience connected sexual intimacy by helping them build self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and self-leadership. I've been following David's work for a while now, and I'm honestly super happy to be able to bring him on the show today. We cover an extremely diverse range of topics, from men's issues with vulnerability and expression, to skillful communication in conflict, to intimacy, and even a bit around mindful masturbation and healthy self-pleasure. If that last topic makes you squeamish, we've saved it for the end so you can still listen to the full episode and get all of the rest of David's wisdom. And when that part comes, you're welcome to skip it. But I do highly recommend checking it out, even if it's out of your comfort zone, as I think it's an incredibly important topic. As always, if you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the show is to leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts, which you can do anonymously. Thank you in advance, and without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with David Chambers.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz, and I am very delighted and excited to be joined today by my guest, David Chambers. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy. How are you doing today?
So I'm excited to dive into a lot of topics with you, particularly around the topics of communication and intimacy in relationships. This is something that comes up with a lot of the work that I do with my clients around porn addiction is how do we connect with the people in our lives and communicate about some of these things that are really challenging. But before we dive into your expertise, I'm always curious about people's origin stories. And I know that, you are an expert in communication, intimacy, relationships, men's issues, but that wasn't always the case. And your background is actually in the tech world. And this is something I resonate with as well. My background is in the sciences and genetics and transitioned out of that. And so I'm just curious, what was it that happened in your life that has gotten you to kind of commit your life to being an educator of these new topics?
Yeah, I guess like many of us, it's my own pain, my own pain and difficulty. I can fast forward back 15 plus years, 16 years maybe. And it was the first time I realized that like my dating life wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. I was starting my tech career at that point. I was doing quite well. I was working for, big multinational corporation, and I wanted to like explore life and enjoy life and start to find depth of experience. And it wasn't me women that wanted to do that. It was me women who wanted to just like buy handbags and go and get drunk in clubs. So I started to do some learning then, and I even dabbled in a bit of coaching in those days. And then I decided to leave that industry, kind of put myself back fully into tech, and also self-development, like learning about myself. Like, why was I doing certain things? Why was I so angry at my father, for instance? He was very absent in my life, and did a lot of healing work around that. Probably not at the time like it was healing work. It's more, the self-development, going to workshops, reading books. And then I traveled the world for 2 years. I traveled all across Asia, South America and Central America. And I came back after 2 years, and I remember sitting down with some of my friends. I saw them individually, and I'd be like, "Hey, how are you?" They'd be like, "Oh," they'd ask me how my travels were. We talk about me for like, half an hour, sometimes a bit longer. They want to see photos. And I'd kind of look them in the eye and say, "How are you doing?" And of like my 5 kind of best friends, 4 of them broke down in tears as soon as I asked them that question. And this was 2017. They just started crying. They were like, 2, 3 of them were going through divorce. One of them was very near to divorce. They were struggling with depression, unhappiness, loneliness, all these things. And it was kind of in that moment, I was like, wow, men are really struggling. And I started to kind of speak to the men in my life. And I started to see men as struggling for purpose and meaning and connection. And an old friend of mine, a good friend of mine, he suggested, he's like, let's bring together the dating knowledge that we have with the self-development knowledge that we've gathered all these years with the work we've done, and bring them together, because there's no one really talking about dating from this perspective, it being kind of spiritual experience in many ways, but also experience of like a vehicle for our own development as men. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And that kind of started the road. The podcast started. It's originally called the Authentic Dating Series. And then, an old work colleague of mine in the tech world asked me if I'd help him out with some of his dating issues. And I started to coach him, and I realized I enjoyed that. And the more I learned about what's going on in the world in terms of men's dating issues, and I start to see, my own interest in sex and intimacy, I'd always been there, and it started to be sparked because I was studying Tantra at the time, and I could speak to women and they'd be telling me about the experiences, the sexual experience we're having. And these were sometimes women who I was sleeping with, who would be like, talking to them later on they'd be like, wow, like with you, it's like this and this. With a lot of men, it's like this, this and this. And I'd be like, and I almost explained to them why men were doing the things they were doing sexually with them. And they'd be like, God, I'd never thought about that, like the impact of masculinity and so forth. So I started to kind of just bring together my own pain, the pain of my friends and the people around me. And then realize that, I have a gift in terms of what I know, and that people like listening to me talk, and my questions often help people, and some of the practices I give them help them with their issues. And I guess from there, I decided to, get a coaching qualification. And, now I just, I'm always learning, always studying, always listening, always reading about something, workshops, programs, and because there's so much to know, but there's also not necessarily always new things, but going deeper into the things we already know.
Yeah. I love that, that your own pain was a vehicle for a lot of your own learning and diving into these topics. And then you realized you could help a lot of other people with these issues. And I find it interesting. You were also getting insight into the problems from both sides, speaking to the men in your life and hearing about the problems, but then also speaking to the women that you were interacting with and hearing about kind of the problems that they were having with men, and starting to understand and pick it apart from both sides.
Yeah, it's still something I do now. In my practice, my partner's also a coach. So we do, like, as part of our kind of coaching practice, we coach each other's clients. So even a couple of days ago, I was talking to one of her clients in a session, and we're talking about the issues that she's having in dating with men. I'm always hearing both sides of the coin. Because I think that's one of the major problems when it comes to dating and relationships, is that men sit around with other men talking about their problems, theorizing what's going on with women, and women sit around with other women theorizing about what's going on with men, but we don't cross that gap often enough and actually really listen to each other to truly understand what's going on for the other side.
Yeah. And, not to toot your horn too much, but it's one of the things I really like about, I've been following your Instagram channel for a while. And one of the things I really like about your approach is it feels very balanced and nuanced and grounded in a world that, in any kind of realm of dating or masculinity or any of this stuff, you can get kind of extremes on both sides. But your approach really does feel very balanced to me. And I'm curious just to dive into some of, that, like, one of the things you talk about is expressing your emotions and learning how to express your needs, express your desires, express your feelings. And I'm curious, why is that such a hard issue for men?
Yeah. I'll talk about why it was hard for me. Right. I grew up, both my parents are Jamaican immigrants to the UK. So they came to the UK in the 70s. They're pretty hardened people. They had to be resilient to be in the UK in that time and what they had to deal with and so forth, right? Both of them also never really knew their fathers. My mother also didn't know her mother. So they raised themselves in many ways. And then, they had me, and they're both not particularly emotional. So I never really learned from them how to express what I feel, what I needed, what I wanted, because it was like, you've got food, you've got water, what else do you need? They didn't, and a roof over your head. So that's kind of one aspect that we get. Sometimes our families, the way they're built, just aren't teaching us how to be expressive, like to even feel what we're feeling, to see that feelings are important, right? Mm. And then the second layer that us men often receive is a kind of socialization around us of the other men that are like, hey, you shouldn't feel anything. Like if you start showing emotions or showing how you feel, or you cry, or you even express joy, that's feminine, that's girly. Don't do that. And this starts to happen from a very, very young age. Like, we're talking 3, 4, 5 years old. It starts happening. Someone falls over in the playground, they start crying, and either a parent or a unsuspected, maybe sibling or family friends, like, come on, boys, big boys don't cry. Stop crying. And then in that moment, we learn the lesson of crying as a boy is bad. Girls cry, boys don't cry. And that lesson, like, I've got grown men I speak to and coach now in their 40s, and when they start to cry, they can see the tension in their bodies holding it back because they're still holding on to that lesson. No matter that they know intellectually now that it's okay to cry, but like that seed that was planted when they were 3, 4, 5 years old has grown into a huge oak tree that's got roots into all areas of their brain. So like you can't pull that out that easily. So they still believe they can't cry. So the part of the crying is, we learn that from a young age. And then this general expression is we don't see it modeled by other men. So we grow up and we see, if you're not too dissimilar to my age, you watch movies and you saw the James Bonds and the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and the Rambos. And those men were like rocks. They never felt anything. Like even when they were sad, it was just like a slight change of posture. There wasn't this like a breaking down, a really deep, heartfelt sadness and so forth. They always seemed to be like having their shit handled all the time. And this grows up young boys, young men, into not knowing how to actually feel or express how they're feeling. Or if they do feel things, they have to suppress them. They have to suppress them and keep down and not show them to anyone, which causes its own issues when it comes to our mental health anyway. So then when it comes to then, we get into kind of relational moments. If we can't feel, we can't connect. So we spend all this time holding back our feelings. Then we go into the working world. If you've been in the corporate world, and the corporate world doesn't care about how you feel, like don't even care about how other people feel. It's the results. It's the money. That's what matters. So we continually shown through our lives again and again that to be a quote unquote real man, we shouldn't feel. We shouldn't express how we feel. No one should know how we feel. We should just suck it up and get on with it. And that, we're seeing a kind of a wave of mental health problems across the world. And I think that's definitely one of the strands that's causing it.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned, these characters from the movies that we've all seen and, look up to, the Rambo and the Arnold Schwarzenegger type characters. And it does have an impact. I remember myself being a young boy and looking at these and thinking, oh, that's a real man, strong and stoic and like a rock. And it strikes me that we don't have a lot of these characters that have shown us why being vulnerable is important. Why is that a strength? And I'm curious, for you, what makes that a strength? What makes that something good to be?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's actually really difficult. It's almost like it's way easier just to like stuff it all down. It's way easier just to stuff all what you're feeling down and not express it. Why it makes it a strength is because you're allowing people into who you are, into your inner world. It's a sign of trust. Like I'm going to trust people to be in my world. There's also a level of resilience. It's like, I can show how I feel. And if someone else doesn't like that, I don't have to make that mean anything about who I am. I'm a sign of confidence. It's like, I can be vulnerable about how I feel I could tell you about how I was deeply sad the other day when I was living in Madeira in Portugal, and I came back and I just felt really sad about leaving. Just a really beautiful place. And I sat and I wanted to, like, there was like times where I really wanted to shed a tear for that life that I had been living in this warm and sunny place. Now, if I am fearful of judgment of how you may view me, right, I won't want to share that because there's an element there you might judge me badly. But I feel confident in myself. So vulnerability is a real sign of confidence. And, a lot of men want to show confidence in many ways in who we are. And it's also a sign for me is like that strength of character to just be like, oh, this is who I am. This is how I'm feeling. Like I can be with how I'm feeling. I'm going to allow it to arise, allowing myself to be present to this moment, to what I'm feeling here and now, and express that. And I probably hear some of these listeners in my ear like, oh, but you can't be in your feelings all the time. No, you can't. That's also part of like emotional intelligence, emotional resilience. It's like there is moments in life where like we do need to like just be like, okay, I'm feeling really sad, but right now I've got a really important presentation to deliver to 15 people in this room. And I can give myself space in, 2 hours time to feel sad. Right. And I can let that out maybe alone or on the phone to a friend. So there's moments, but it's good for us to let out what's there, like I'm sure many of the people listening here, it's like the number of times that you've been like, oh, I don't want to tell anyone about this problem I've got, let me keep it to myself. You start feeling worse and worse and worse. And then you tell somebody and you really express it and they listen to you and you walk away, you're like, wow, I feel better. Like nothing's changed really. I feel better. You may even have come up with some solutions to what was going on or some remedies to help you and so forth by simply speaking it, by expressing it out of you.
What would you say, I was just speaking with a client 2-3 days ago about this topic, and this client was struggling to open up and be vulnerable. And it was because he had been burned in the past. He had tried being vulnerable, and the person that he was vulnerable with, didn't take it well. And instead of being a good listener, a compassionate listener, just kind of, hey, thank you for sharing that with me. I see you, I understand you. This person started giving advice and kind of telling them what to do. And it wasn't a receptive experience. And I'm curious, what advice would you have for someone who has been burned in the past about how to move forward and navigate being vulnerable? Like, what do they do to go forward?
Yeah, this is a common issue. I think that's like guys I work with as well. So first of all, I always recommend this, like who in your life can you speak to? Who is there in your life? Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a friend, a trusted friend, someone you know, right? And go to those people and express. Now, also I add in one, and this is something you can do with anybody. There's a little conversational piece, like when you're telling someone, hey, I'm going to tell you about something that's going on for me. What I really need is for you to just listen. I'm not looking for advice. I'm not looking for a solution. Like, I really just need to, would you be able to do that? And everybody just goes, yeah, of course, man. Of course. Because you've made it clear, like, oh, this is the boundary of what you're asking of me. Cool. And in many ways, you make it easier for someone because they don't have to do any cognitive work now on listening to you. Like, oh, he's telling me about, he's having some money problems. Okay, now I need to start thinking about how a solution for his money problems. Oh, we just want you to listen. Oh, yeah. Okay, I can listen. Yeah. And then they can shut down that part of the brain and they can just listen. So that's something that I recommend. I do that myself in my own relationship with my partner. She's a coach, so maybe sometimes she will ask me that question midway through. She'll be like, hey, do you just want me to listen, or are you looking for like some help solution? I'll be like, no, I just want you to listen. Okay, cool. And then we carry on. But it's just like asking for what we need, right? And that can feel a bit vulnerable sometimes. The other thing you can do is if you start telling someone and they do start to advise you, you can just ask them, hey, like, I know you mean really well, but I'm not really looking for advice on this right now.
Yeah. I
Like
think
I'm really
that's some of
grateful.
the best advice. I love that in relationship also. My friend started doing that to me like 2 years ago, and it made such an impact when she kind of showed me that practice of just saying, what do you need from me right now? Do you just want me to listen? Or are you looking for solutions and brainstorming advice? And it's such a simple act of communication, of clarity, and saying, how can I help you right now? What do you need from me? And it's interesting because our gut instinct when somebody tells us a problem is to try to solve it. Like, okay, how can I help and how can I figure this out? When most of the time people just want to be heard with a compassionate ear.
Mm, mm,
I'd love to dive into relationships. I think it's one of the things I'm most excited to talk to you about
mm,
is these issues of communication, in particular in relationships. And in part, it's one of the things that a lot of my clients are dealing with is communicating around difficult or sensitive topics. If it's around intimacy not going the way that they want, if it's around differences of opinion, how do you clean the house? Do we want it tidy or do we want to hold on to things that are sentimental? All of the ways that we kind of show up in relationship. And so I'm curious for you, what do you wish more people knew about communication?
That's a beautiful question. I think the thing I wish more people knew was we don't listen to each other. That's the that's the most that's the thing to start off with, right? That's what I wish we do, and not in the way that, not in a malicious sense, because what we do is we listen to people through the lens of, we listen to people through the lens often is like, what does this mean? What does this mean about me? What are they telling? What are they saying? How does this relate to me? What does this mean about me? So we're listening to people. So like, say you say to me, hey, David, could you clean the kitchen? I don't necessarily hear the words. I kind of hear the words and I process them through like, what does this mean about me? And then I also process this through like my own lens and fears and insecurities about myself. So if I hear you say, I want you to clean the kitchen, I might be like, oh my God, Jeremy once told me that I'm messy. I might go, oh, but I always clean the kitchen. I cleaned it last week. And you'll be like, you'll hear that and then you'll feel that through your lens, right? Of your own insecurities and fear and, and so forth. And then you'll react to that. So we're not really listening to the words but that are actually being communicated and the phrases and the meaning that's there. We add on extra meaning and extra processing to that. And this creates a lot of the miscommunication that's happening in people's relationships. So the thing I wish people knew is that like, they know that they're not fully listening to the words, that they're processing it through this kind of almost their own persona of how they view themselves. Because if we knew that, we would be a bit more compassionate with each other, right? We might be a bit clearer with our language when we talk, and we may question each other a little bit more like, what did you hear me say? It's a question you often hear in my house between me and my partner. She'll like say something to me and I'll respond and she'll go, what did you hear me say? And I'll stop and go, yeah, actually, I heard you say the words, da, 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 da. But what I made that mean was this other thing. And she'll go, okay, cool. And I'll go, oh yeah. So actually you just asked me to do this. Yeah, I can do that. Because when we start to notice that we add in extra meaning and processing, we have an opportunity to be aware that that isn't necessarily the truth of what's being said to us.
It strikes me that it takes a lot of self-awareness and humility and communication skills to be able to kind of both not disengage, but to get unhooked, for lack of a better term, like to the reason I'm bringing this up is like a lot of the people that I talk to about their conversations are one partner is usually triggered by something and isn't in that receptive state to say, oh yes, I see how I'm making a story about this because of, my past traumas and insecurities. Yes, let me de-escalate. And I see what you're saying so clearly. It's usually like two shit storms, battling it out in space. And so I'm just curious, what practical tools do you have? Like, are there techniques? Are there certain things you can say in the moment to kind of bring people back to presence and cool things down a bit?
Yeah. One of the simplest things we can bring into play is that one person speaks at a time. And like there's a whole technique that one of my favorite tools to give to couples is a Margot dialogue. It comes from a book called Get the Love You Want. It's the book's been out for 20, 30 years, but it's phenomenal. And one of the things I have in there is this Margot dialogue, a Margot couples dialogue, I think it's called. And this is what I recommend for a lot of couples if they need to speak about a sensitive topic. And inside the structure, you have like a speaker, and you have a sender and a receiver. And the sender is the person that maybe is bringing the thing. So they'll be saying, hey, I don't know, and they'll going something that maybe people have experienced, like, I feel like I would like to, have more sex. There's not enough sex in our relationship. I'd like to be having more sex. I'd like to have more, the sex last longer and be more passionate, be more affectionate. Now, that's something that can trigger the fuck out of people, right? If your partner comes to you and says there's not enough sex, because then we go into judgment about us not being enough, not being good enough, then being unhappy with the relationship and all these things, right? We get triggered by hearing that because we're processing it through our insecurities about ourselves and our lens of ourselves, but also the lens that we see our partner. So if we just respond to that fear, we're going to be responding to the trigger that's there in our fear. Now, if the receiver in the Margot dialogue, the receiver would hear the information, hear what's said, and paraphrase back what's being said, reflect it back. Just reflect it back with no critique, no modification, nothing added on top, just reflect it back. So it might be like, what I'm hearing you say is, okay, you would like to have more sex that happens more often, that's more passionate, more central. And the sender will go, yeah, I heard that. And then there's a second part, which is the verification. So the receiver will basically say like, yeah, that makes sense because I know that that's the sort of sex that you like having, for instance. And then the third step is empathy. Now, this is the really golden. The reflection is really important, but the really golden step is the empathy, right? Because in that moment, you have to imagine what the sender is feeling, right? So you use feeling words, but inside that you might hear your partner say they want more sex, that's more passionate. It's like, okay, what I'm feeling, you're feeling is maybe disconnected. You're feeling a bit sad. You could be feeling, what could be there in that moment? Some longing, right? And they might hear all that and go, okay, yeah, that's all there. Actually, I'm also feeling this, and this, but cool. So that ensures that the person is heard as they are expressing themselves without any defensiveness and so forth. So it de-escalates a lot of the emotions that start flying around because all the focus is on what's being said, not on any responses, not any sort of defensiveness or anything like that. And you hear them and you go, okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, cool, that makes sense. Whereas if we get into this back and forth battle, we just get two people who basically become bickering children, right? I want this thing. Oh, but you always have that thing. Why are you always complaining? And that's how we escalate. So that's one simple practice that we can bring in. It also, there's one, it's not so much a structure, but like owning your imagined story. So like if your partner tells you something is like, I'm imagining that what you're saying is this. So it's like owning that, that you are imagining something that's not true, right? So you're giving voice to that imagined story. But I find the Margot dialogue is very powerful. Especially when you keep practicing it on simple things and you move up the ladder. Like I've seen couples who can't talk, they text. The only way they talk is through text message. And I've seen them then get to a point where they can sit in front of each other and have conversations about things that are quite triggering and come to the end and realize that they both want the same thing and they both love each other. and so forth, and find solutions out of that, of just listening to each other. So it takes a willingness to kind of step out of the cycle as well. It takes a willingness to actually want to hear the other person. You know, I think sometimes we don't really want to hear, and it takes a desire to not, and to stand outside of being right. That's one of the most destructive things inside of communication. And this will probably one of the, when I work with couples, one of the first things I say to them is like, you need to stop trying to be right. Being right will destroy your relationship. This is not work. This is, don't bring, as I say to people, it's like, don't bring the patriarchy into your relationship. Because the structure of patriarchy is about winning, right? It's about winning at all costs. You know, that it could be argued, but it's winning at all costs. Don't bring that into your relationship. You don't need to, winning arguments is not good for connection. It might make you feel righteous, but actually it's one of the fastest ways I see to really destroy a relationship is continually trying to be right and be kind of nitpicky and pedantic over small points.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I like to have my clients do is to kind of imagine themselves, really visualize themselves as being, you know, two people in the same spaceship. You know, it's like as a team, they're going to the same destination rather than this adversarial, like, no, I'm right, you're wrong, this like combative nature. It's like to really recognize you're a team and you're going in the same direction. And the more that you can, you know, collaborate and work together and say, hey, you know, there's this asteroid ahead, like, what should we do about this thing together? As opposed to, I'm right, you're wrong. What I love about the exercise you just mentioned is particularly that empathy stage where you're getting the person to put themselves in the shoes of the other person and just imagine what they might be feeling. You know, oh, yeah, I guess you might be feeling some longing or some sadness or insecurity. And I think that's such a shift, you know, to imagine the feelings of the other person. As you say, though, it takes kind of two willing people. And I'm curious if you ever work with couples where one side of it is just more kind of stubborn in that sense of, no, I'm right and they're wrong. And I'm not going to do this hippy dippy crap of listening and empathy.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely think of a few couples and they're just like, one of them is I don't want to do this. I don't need to do this. This is clunky. This is awkward. This is not real. This is fake, all that stuff. And then I just say, this might sound a bit harsh. I'm like, how's the communication working out for you right now? How's it working for you right now in the way that you do it now? And I'm like, you know, are you happy with it? They're like, no. I'm like, well, give this a try. Give this a try. I want you to do it, you know, 5 times, right? Or, you know, when I work with my partner, often couples will sit and we have them in front of us, either in person or on Zoom, and we walk them through it. We take them through the steps. And then you ask them, what's the proof in the pudding? I'm like, how did that feel? You know, and they'll be like, oh, I feel like they really heard me. Yeah. Does that usually happen? No. Usually this would be an argument. Okay, cool. Is this better than normal? Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's do it then. Let's try it. And then they try it and they see that, okay, yeah, it's not easy, but the results in the end really, really do help them. There is this tendency, I think sometimes in relationship, it's like one person wants the relationship to grow and they're wanting to like be better, and the other person can be stubborn. And it's often in that stubbornness, there's a fear. There's some fear about themselves. There's a fear about their capacity and their ability to do things. There's a fear of even not being good enough, not being able to do things. So it's like tackling, often I you know, if it's for working with couples, I'll speak to both of them and I'll kind of get into that. I'll get into that fear. Like, what is that? What are you worried about? Are you worried they're going to leave you? You know, often it comes down to that. I'm worried they're going to leave, or I'm worried that, I won't be good enough, or, you know, it's going to hurt us. And it's like just being with that fear, allowing that voice, allow it to come up and to discuss that. because underneath so much of our resistance is just simply fear of some experience you've had before, or fear of what we're going to lose something in the future.
Yeah, fear is such a driver for disconnection, it seems.
Totally.
I'm wondering if I know you work with a lot of couples, and if the topic of porn ever comes up, because again, one of the things that comes up a lot in the work I do is usually a man, but one of the partners having a secret around their porn use and having a lot of difficulty in even broaching the topic, and the fear that, might come about if they were to let their partner know. And I'm just curious, what's your take on that? What do you do in a situation like that?
Where one partner is afraid to tell their partner that, they watch porn or they've had porn addiction in the past.
Yeah.
What I see with a lot of men is that they've had some experience at life where they told a partner that they watched porn or looked at porn or, some engagement with porn, and they got a negative reaction, whether it's judgment, whether it's like, oh, would you need that? You have me, jealousy, all those sorts of things. And then we store that as like, that's how all women are. And then I often find it's like, okay, so then they're hiding that they watch porn sometimes, hiding it. Oh my God, if she found out, she'll go, no, why do you think that? And then, talk to me about that. Cool. Okay. Is there something about the type of porn you watch that you feel shame around? There's always checking there. Is there fantasies that you get to live out, that you get to watch, that you enjoy? Because I think there's always, often I found with men is that there's some level with watching porn for them that there's something in the porn that they wish they had in their own sex life, or they wish they were experiencing themselves. It might not be to the extremes of what they're watching. There might just be like a 10%, like maybe they want to feel more domineering, or they want to feel more like a leader in sex. So I'll be like, okay, cool. So there's something you're getting. Cool. Do you think your partner watches porn? And they're like, no. Cool. I'm like, you sure? They're like, I was like, have you ever talked about it? No, never. Can't talk about it. And I say, like, okay, how do you think you could broach the topic? Like, how could you kind of test the waters and see what their opinion is? Right? You might talk about someone else watching porn, and that sounds like my friend likes to watch porn. That old one. But also you might start looking at things like this, like ethical porn. There's porn that's coming through from female directors and making sure that everyone involved is porn that's done by amateurs and all these sorts of things. And they're like, oh yeah, that's true. I'm like, maybe a conversation like that. Talk about the industry and see what their thoughts are, but maybe educate yourself a little bit as well, right? So that you don't go into this conversation and your partner knows all this stuff about the less ethical side of porn, and you're just left like a deer in headlights. Ashley can say, oh, there's this other stuff, there's this, there's that. And it can be a really great way, I find, to talk about sexual desires that you haven't experienced or you'd like to experience together. So I often, and if it's porn addiction, then I say, then, this is, this, if you feel it's valuable for them to understand you, then have a conversation about this thing you've experienced, right? And be like, yeah, this is something I've grappled with, something that's been difficult for me, blah, blah, blah. And again, you just ask them, hey, I'm bringing something, maybe caveats. I want to talk to you something about that's really vulnerable for me, that I feel difficulty in sharing, or a little bit of shame in bringing up. So, I just ask that you kind of hold it in that way, and then you express what's there for you, because then you're giving them a chance to like, not necessarily de-escalate them, but it's like you're telling them like, hey, I'm bringing this tender part of my soul, and I'd love you to hold it really, gently. Can you do that for me? And, people want to do that for the people they care about.
Yeah. It almost kind of strikes me as you're going through that Margot conversation of the empathy stage of getting them to connect with your emotion of, hey, I'm really afraid in this moment. I'm really scared to share this thing with you, and I'm feeling a lot of fear. And and nervousness, and can you kind of hold space for that emotion and know that this is really tough for me? That's a great way to start a conversation, it seems. I'm curious, what advice do you have for men who want to create a more fulfilling relationship? You know, I know a lot of the work you do is around fulfillment in relationship, like deep, conscious connection. I was reading a post of yours where you kind of said, like, stop using the word conscious all the fucking time. Like, conscious this, conscious that. It's like, one way to have a more conscious relationship is to stop using the word conscious on everything. But I think it is beautiful, this idea of a conscious connection.
Mm.
And I'm curious, maybe first of all, what is a conscious connection? What is conscious intimacy?
I think I see it as where we are aware of the choices we're making. It's like we're not engaging with each other on autopilot. So like, you know, the Imago dialogue is you could say is a conscious communication tool, because our unconscious communication tools are defensiveness, criticism, and if I forget, stonewalling. They're the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse from the Gottmans. There's one more I can't remember, but it's like, that's how we usually, you know, when we're listening through our lens of our insecurities and so forth, we are communicating unconsciously. We're just reactive. We're reacting to each other. So conscious intimacy would be like choosing that, I'm going to choose to consciously connect to you deeper. I want to consciously choose to communicate with you deeper. I want to consciously come together in this relationship to connect deeper, and choosing that, and like being willing to be vocal about that choice as well.
It sounds like it's almost about being more intentional about how we're showing up and the values that we're bringing into the relationship.
Yeah. Like, you know, how many people really stop and think before they get in a relationship, like, what type of relationship? What do I want the traits and values and attributes of a relationship I'd like? Or even in another person that we want. You know, it's a very regular thing I do with men, and I seem to struggle with it. It's like, what sort of woman do you want to meet and be with? You know, I want her to be relaxed and chill and funny. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's like 95% of women on the planet sometimes. You know, we're all those things because we're so multifaceted. Like, what's your particular flavor that you really desire? So we kind of work through those sorts of questions. In terms of relationship, you know, I had a client last night I spoke to, and I asked him a question, and he's wanting to really kind of transform his relationship. And I was like, what do you want your relationship to look like in a year from now? What would you love it to look like a year from now? And he kind of answered the question, and I was like, okay, cool. Right. That's a nice start to the picture. I was like, what would you love the communication between you and your partner to look like in a year from now? And then he was like, oh, okay. And then he, you know, spoke for a few minutes. I was like, cool. And I was like, how would you love the two of you to deal with conflict in your relationship a year from now? And we just went through these different aspects of his relationship. And he was like, wow, like I'd never really thought about how I could intentionally create this in my mind for what I want the relationship to be like. And we kind of got to a point where I asked him various questions around the intimacy that he wants. What do you want the intimacy to be like? You know, what do you want the emotional expression to be like between the two of you? And then he's gone off and he's like, yeah, I'm going to write it all out, and I'm going to talk to my partner about it. I'm going to bring this as like, this is what I'd really love. And I said to him, okay, who do you need to be, right, in the relationship to create the relationship like this? How do you need to show up, right? Obviously, it can be hard to do it every single day, right? Because you're a human being. But what's the man that you need to start being? And he was like, oh, wow. He was like, David, wow, okay, and then he spoke through it. He was like, yeah, I need to do this, and I need to be like this. I need to start reacting like this. I need to believe this, you know. And we went through like, what practices do you need to do? What conversations? And it just started to sparkle these ideas. He's like, wow, me and my partner probably need to sit down once a month or once a week to talk about what's on our mind and, you know, what we love. And blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, all these pieces started to fall into place. And it's like, and this is the power when we think about what it is we want our relationship to be like. But we don't know how to do this because no one really did this. You know, our parents probably didn't sit us down and go, hey, this is how you do relationship. Like, they didn't model this to us, you know, like I come from a single parent family. So like, there was no modeling of what you meant to do as a man in relationship. So we have to come to terms with the fact that sometimes how we've been taught or how we're doing relationship isn't really working for us, isn't making us happy. And that it isn't always just the women that we're meeting.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, you've probably heard of it, Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. It's just this, like, getting someone to think about, hey, you know, what is the ideal? Like, what would it look like if it were really working well? What would your communication look like? What would your intimacy look like? What would you look like? Like, how would you be showing up? And this is something I do with my clients as well. In porn recovery, it's so important to think about, okay, you know, what does your dream future look like? How do you want to show up in the world? And getting them to really envision that future can be so motivating. Like, oh, how beautiful that would be if we were able to communicate in this way, to work through difficulty in this way. I'm curious for you, you know, if someone does this envisioning practice and they're able to really connect with what they want it to look like, but they feel so down on themselves. They feel so like, I'm so far away from that. Like I have too much trauma. I'm too triggered. I'm broken. What would you say to that person?
Well, we've got a journey. We've got an exciting journey ahead. Right? We've got to start somewhere as well. Like, and also it's like, would you rather just stay where you are? Would you rather just stay here than start this road or get 50% down the road, right? Maybe you get 50% down and life is 90% better. You know, because it's not a linear thing, is it? It's like, inside one of the groups I'm running now, one of the men, some of the practices I took them through helped them be less reactive to their partners when, you know, become defensive less. And just that little piece being, you know, 50% less reactive to his partner has transformed his relationship, right? They're more deeply connected. The intimacy is deeper. His relationship with his children is deeper. And he's like, oh man, this one thing, right? This one thing has made such a difference across the relationship. It's not a linear. We often kind of think like that, you often think it's linear. Like, oh, if I get 10% down this journey, the relationship's going to be 10% better. But it's like, there's some quick wins along the journey, often at the beginning, that have a far bigger impact on the kind of state of relationship, the happiness of relationship. So it's like, is this a journey you want to go on? Right? Is this excite you? Right? Would you rather stay where you are? Right? You know, most people don't say they want to stay where they are, but you know, staying where they are is comfortable and easy. It's comfortable, is easy, is known. You know, that's a big thing. People stay where they are, not because they want to, because they like, this is what I've known all my life. So it's like, oh, I'll stay there.
Yeah.
And there might be fear ahead. And, you know, if I'm working with someone, it's like, well, I'm here to support you. I'm here to support you along this way, along this journey, to help you stay on the path that you are choosing, the path that you want. So you're not on your own, as you've probably been a lot of the time before. You've got support. I'm here to support you. Or, you know, if it's a group program, this whole group is here to support you. You've got a whole group of men here supporting you, rooting for you. And you've also got your partner, you know, especially usually there's a buy-in, like they want it too. It enlivens and excites them as well. So it's like, does this sound like a journey, a battle, a fight that you want to take up, you know? And most people are like, yeah, like I want it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think getting them to connect to that dream future, part of what it does is it motivates and says, no, I want that future. I want it. And I'm willing to put in the work. And even if I can only take a few steps, it's better than staying where I am now.
Mm.
I also, you probably do this as well. Sometimes I do the opposite, which is envisioning the default future, which is, hey, if you don't make a change, you know, where are you going to end up 5 years from now? What are the consequences of not taking action on this? And usually that reflection, they also realize, like, if I don't do something about this, I'm going to break up with my partner. I'm going to lose my marriage, lose my job, feel depressed, you know, all those things. So they can both be motivating.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm curious to dive into some more juicy topics.
Hey.
You know, I imagine that a lot of, again, the work that you do around intimacy involves sexuality. And you know, before we started recording, you were talking about some of the client work you were doing and teaching a workshop on mindful masturbation. And so I want to dive into some of this work. And I guess first, I'm just curious, you know, this is a podcast around porn addiction, but it's also, my approach is very non-judgmental and open. And, you know, if somebody, you know, says they have a healthy relationship with porn or it's benefiting their life, I'm not here to tell them that they shouldn't do it or that it's evil. Obviously, it's like the addiction is a problem. But I'm curious, in the work you've done with couples and in relationships, are you noticing an effect of porn on intimacy? Like, are there things that you're noticing about how it affects relationships, either negative or positive?
Yeah. I'll start with the I'll start with the negative. So what I see, and it's with hiding as well, the hiding of the porn adds to it, right? If there's like a open porn use and it there's a strange thing that I've seen is like, if a man's hiding porn use, he's almost more likely to use it more. And then it has a more of a negative effect on the relationship, right? And obviously that, you know, he's hiding it, so there's a level of shame. He knows he's hiding something. His mind is not necessarily present with his partner because he knows he's hiding something. There's some shame there, and it probably gets in the way of some of the communication. Men, I find, who watch a lot of porn and have done in their lives, they are unconsciously skewed in how they see sex, because, you know, we're not watching, most of the time that we're watching porn, we're not watching like two loving couples have sex for an hour and a half, right? That's not what we're seeing. We're watching 30 seconds to 6 minutes of porn, which is like the highlight reel. They chopped out anything that feels like actual intimacy. So I find that men who have watched a lot of porn, they struggle with the actual intimate part of sex, like the slowness, the touching, the presence, the eye contact. All those things are uncomfortable for them. I also find there's a standard arc of they get aroused very quickly, and they almost lose consciousness in their arousal. So it's like they're with a partner and they just want to almost get it over and done with. There's an anxiety, and it creates a speed, right? So they rush through intimacy. The kissing, the touching, the foreplay, like the penetration that's done. It's almost like it starts to condition them to a pace of sex that isn't necessarily what I would say is what they necessarily desire, but that there's a lot of emotions happening for them that just kind of take over the moment. That's definitely a negative effect I see. And then for single men, what I see who want a relationship, is it's almost like, I think porn can give them that level of satisfaction that being with a woman could give them. So that if they're watching porn a lot, they almost become disinterested in actual dating. But often with men, it's like, hey, how much do you masturbate? How often do you ejaculate? They tell me. And I'm like, okay, for 1 month, I want you to not talk. And we're going to do a bit more dating and just see if this has an effect on your dating life. If you're more proactive, or you're more present, or you're more able to hold intense emotions without needing to get rid of them. Because I think that's one of the things that porn can kind of show us, like, oh, if there's intensity of a moment or of emotional intensity, I need to dissipate this right now in some way. Right? I need to get rid of this some way, right? But the one of the things we need to train ourselves in is that life has intense moments, and I think the thing that's so important to train ourselves to is to hold the intensity and be able to stay with the intensity and be present without needing to dissipate it or to run away or to become overly reactive. Because when we're kind of in interesting sex, when it go on for longer periods of time, arousal's intensity. We get aroused, it's intense, and if we can hold that with ourselves or with our partner, then we can stay in that feeling, we can enjoy the pleasure that's there as well. So what I see in couples that have a kind of healthy relationship with porn and they talk about it is they actually use it together. They bring it into their relationship from time to time. They'll be like, oh yeah, we watch porn together. Or they'll talk about like, oh, I was watching this video, it came up and they were doing this thing. And I was thinking, like Shabari, for instance, I had a conversation with someone that they were like, oh, I saw this rope tying thing in this porn I was watching. And I was like, wow, I was like fascinated by it. And then they're like, oh, I showed it to the partner. She was like, wow, what's this? It's amazing. Could we try this? Could we do this at home or can we go somewhere? And then it allows them to bring in these different elements of sexuality and sexual experience that they may never have come across, right? Mm-hmm. And they can bring that in together. Porn can be a way to bond with our partners, to share, like, what is it you like? What sort of porn do you like? You like girl on girl. Okay. What is it about it that you like? Oh, I like the sexuality. I like the slowness, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, would you like to experience more of that in our sex? Yeah, I'd love that. Okay. What sort of porn do you like? Like, oh, I like, I don't know, man. I like squirting porn. Oh, you like squirting porn? Oh, is that something you us to be able to try it? Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we could have a workshop about that. Or maybe we could watch it together. Or, because sometimes underneath the thing you're enjoying, there's a feeling that you like, with people who like to be DOMs, for instance, there's often a feeling of control and power that they enjoy, right? There with people who like to be subs, there's often a sense of powerlessness and helplessness and not being in control, being directed that they enjoy, right? So we often see kind of sub dom and we, especially society can be very judgmental of that situation. But when we look at the feeling underneath that people get and they enjoy, like we all, subs love surrender, like surrender is a beautiful feeling to be in when you're with someone you trust and it's holding you. But then it's like, oh, maybe we can get that sensation of surrender outside of the bedroom. Like, oh, how could we kind of experience surrender outside the bedroom? How could I experience power and control outside the bedroom? But you can also bring them in there. So there's ways we can use porn as ways to learn about ourselves and different aspects of our sexual experience that we like to enjoy. And I believe it's a really, I always believe, if you have a good, healthy porn use, like bringing that into your relationship can really add to the relationship. The key must be, again, is a level of consciousness, is a level of like judgment that we don't place on what our kind of partner likes and enjoys. Because it's easy for us to look at what they're enjoying and liking and compare that to what we don't have or what we don't do. One of the problems is that people get into judgment. Like if, they see what their partner likes and then they start going, they like women with Brazilian women. I'm not Brazilian.
It's interesting. So there's a lot of interesting studies about this, about, the when is porn helpful, when is it not? In general, obviously, I think what you're saying, and I kind of agree, is the only real time I can see a benefit is in connection with your partner. Doing something together seems to be kind of the secret sauce if it's going to work. That doing it in isolation as this solo thing, it's taking energy away from your partner. It's, all these consequences. What's interesting to me is the research around how porn affects intimacy. And I've seen some studies showing that the more that men use porn, even if it's in conjunction with their partner, the less interested they are in their partner in general. That it kind of steals that attention, that energy. Whereas there are some studies showing that for women, the more that women use porn, the more interested they are in their partner. that it's not this either or energy. It's kind of just opening them up to sensuality and sexuality in general. But I think, again, as you're saying, one of the big issues to be aware of is just this kind of comparison, the judgment, the way it might make us feel insecure in our sexuality or in our looks, or, oh, I'm not as attractive as these porn stars that he's looking at. Yeah, it's a tricky road, but if it works for some people, it works for some people. And as you say, it could be a way to explore your kinks, what you're into. I'm curious for you, what's the difference? You mentioned people who watch a lot of porn and the ways that they tend to be a bit more fast, a bit more kind of, not able to drop into the slower side of sex. And I'm curious for you, what's the difference between sex and intimacy?
Yeah. I'd say sex is the act of having sex. And, there's a range of what people call sex now. You could, when I was a young boy, sex was basically penetration. And now we could argue that sex is the foreplay, the lead up, the oral, all these things are part of the act of sex. Whereas I'd say intimacy has a closeness, like the word intimacy, I always kind of describe it as it's about closeness. It's about closeness as being together, a togetherness. So intimacy or sexual intimacy, when it actually has intimacy, is like there's a closeness of two people. So there's little things like care, just like even caring, like, oh, how are they? Are they enjoying this? Am I enjoying this? There's a feeling of wanting to connect beyond just the physical, just the physical pieces of our body. Because
it's almost like the emotional component of it, it sounds like.
Yeah. Because obviously, there's some inside of a relationship, we can argue there's like a lot of different types of intimacy, emotional intimacy, non-sexual physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, experiential intimacy, which is, experiences that we do together, spiritual intimacy, which is like, sharing our spiritual ideas together. Even kind of conflict intimacy is like how close are we in conflict, and most of those layers, especially in emotional intimacy and conflict intimacy, and all those affect our sexual intimacy. All of them in my eyes. Like if your relationship, if sexual intimacy in your relationship has stopped, died, or is waning very seriously, look at all those different areas. Look at all the different areas. Like how emotionally close are you? Like how much are you listening to each other and empathizing and understanding? How much are you sharing shared experiences together? Doing new things together? How spiritually connected are you in terms of your ideas, in terms of, grander ideas of being and purpose and meaning and universe? Like, can you share those with each other without being belittled or criticized? Do you listen and try and empathize and understand? Because do you have much non-sexual physical intimacy, hugging, kissing, little touches here and out there throughout the day? Because if those areas are missing, there's a lack of intimacy in those different areas, and your sexual intimacy will very much likely be feeling the brunt of that.
I love this. I've never heard of this idea, but I really love this idea of these different flavors of intimacy. Like sexual, we always just think, oh, intimacy is about sex. But what you're also bringing up is the different flavors of, hey, there's conflict intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy, there's non-sexual physical intimacy. And what I'm hearing you're saying is that all of these other forms of intimacy affect sexual intimacy, but I imagine that they all affect each other. That if your sexual intimacy is kind of askew, that's going to affect your emotional intimacy, your spiritual intimacy, and that it's like this tangled web in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I see often, people are unhappy in their sexual intimacy, and one of the first questions I asked them, not the first is always about the emotional. The second one is conflict. Are there any unresolved conflicts in your relationship that you keep sweeping under the rug? Like every long-term relationship will have some conflict, some disagreement that you don't agree on. That's a simple fact of it, right? There's been studies on this, like the Gottmans have done long-term bits of research around this. Relationships will always have some level of disagreement and conflict that take years or decades in some of the examples that they talk about in their books to resolve. But often we allow a lot of things to just be like, because we don't want to really talk about it. We don't have the tools. We don't, have the tools to listen and understand. And those things fester and they create distance between us. They create like a lack of trust, a lack of safety, that they create a kind of distance between us. And they get felt so much in sex, so much when there's all these conflicts. Like, how often do we have a conflict with our partner, not resolve it, and actually want to have sex with each other? Very rarely. Mm-hmm. If we're in conflict, it's like, it's there. So those conflicts that we don't resolve, like maybe it's not like at the heightened level of the 100% you've just had the conflict, but it's sitting in your relationship, in the energetic field of relationship at 10, 20%. Yeah. And if you've got multiple of these hanging around, the two of you might be just moving through the motions of life. You're doing all the actions of being in a relationship. Like, yeah, you live together, you sleep in the same bed, you go out for dinner, but there's always this feeling of distance and disconnection. So when that's the case, it's like, what's the conflicts that are unresolved? What are the emotions that aren't being talked about or being empathized with? Those often are really kind of strong places to look.
Yeah, I love the connection you're bringing between, intimacy on the one hand, and then kind of the polar opposite of that is this disconnection, this feeling of, distance, disconnection. And it is the opposite of intimacy. Intimacy being, hey, we're like this, we're connected. And then if that's not there, there's this feeling of disconnect, the distance between you. Yeah. I'd love to dive into kind of the juiciest topic for last, which is something that we started talking about before we hit the record button, but mindful masturbation. One of the things that I am a huge proponent of with the guys that I work with in porn addiction is when you're breaking free from porn addiction, you don't have to stop masturbating. And in fact, if you're feeling a strong sexual urge, if you're feeling horny, to allow yourself to self-pleasure. And the reason I say that is that it's very hard to overdo it on masturbation without porn. It's, if you have porn, you can just keep going for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. But without porn, you masturbate and it's hard to overdo it. And I'd say it's like junk food versus fruit. Like you can just keep eating potato chips and cookies until you want to throw up. But fruit, it's hard to overdo it. And so masturbation is something that I think a lot of the guys I work with are learning how to do in a more mindful way without porn. And so I'm just curious, what are some of the tips you have? Like, what is mindful masturbation? And what are some of the tips you have around it?
Yeah. So it's really, the first kind of part of mindful masturbation for me is removing porn. Because for me, it's a practice of connecting to self, connecting to our own physical sensations and our own body and our own feeling, our own arousal and all those things. Because when we have porn, we are looking outward, we're looking outside of ourselves, and we're also in our heads, right? They're also in our heads. One of the biggest problems that men come to me with sexually is they're like, oh, when I'm having sex, I can't get out of my head. I'm overthinking and it affects my erections, it affects my ejaculation, it affects my level of connection. So this is a practice of bringing you kind of back into the body, back into your sensations, into what you're feeling. So, the first thing is removing porn, not having porn present. That often terrifies guys. And the reason why I find that terrifies them is a kind of internalized fear around not getting an erection, even when they're alone, right? And that's also one of the parts of mindful masturbation is you don't necessarily need to get an erection. There's no pressure to get an erection. You can do all of this without an erection. As one of the female educators that I sometimes speak to, she's like, she first said it to me. She was like, soft dicks feel pleasure too. And they do, they really do. They feel pleasure as well. So I recommend guys set a timer, just so, you don't have to set a timer. It's not a necessary, but it's actually in a way is to make sure that you take the time. So it could be 15 minutes or half an hour. I recommend, something that's reasonably lengthy. Starting with some relaxation, That might be a meditation. It might be some deep breathing, because one of the things that happens when we watch a lot of porn is we rush, and it creates a stress in the body. And though to ejaculate, there's a kind of seesaw of the nervous system that has to kind of come from relaxation into an arousal state, to ejaculate and then back into relaxation, is like start off training your nervous system to be relaxed. Start training yourself to be relaxed, and that you can be relaxed with the arousal of self-pleasure. So start with some relaxation, some deep breathing, which I also recommend kind of continuing through the practice, the deep breathing. And start by touching the whole body, not just going straight to the penis, because that's something we normally also do. We go straight to the penis and we forget we have this whole body that has this skin stuff on it that enjoys to be touched and can feel pleasure very deep. So, taking a few minutes to touch your whole body, you might be stroking your arms, it might be stroking your chest, and it allows a man to discover these parts of him. And they're like, oh, I like it when I like my chest to be stroked just underneath my nipple. That gives you a bit of information and data. Maybe with a partner or a future partner, you can express to them what it is you like and how you like to be touched. So you get to touch your whole self and feel that. And I really tell men, it's like, be expressive. Like if you want to kiss your arms or, whatever it is, like really go for it. Play. Use this as a way to play and explore. So that's kind of the next stage of touching the body. And then when you move to the penis, that you move to it slowly. You might even start by touching the areas around it. You might even start with a gentle massage around the area, the perineum, around the balls, stuff like that. So just start off gently. And then slowly moving towards the penis and stroking and using lube. I forgot the lube. Lube is a really important part of this. There's this, if you're a man listening to this and you don't use lube to masturbate, I'm very happy that I've just changed your life. Get some lube, use lube. Lube's amazing, right? So use some lube and start off with slow strokes, not just at the head, right? Because that's something also we do. Touch the whole penis, that's the whole thing, the shaft, be an explorer of your own body, your own self, and how different parts of it feel. And you slowly work your way up, maybe in speed. If you find yourself getting close to ejaculation, and this is the kind of consciousness part, is slow down. Because also my version of the mindful masturbation is to try not to ejaculate, to play with not ejaculating. So play with kind of edging is like moving up the levels of arousal. If we say that like a 10 is you've ejaculated, you've just ejaculated, you're just ejaculating. 8 is often that kind of point of no return where you can hold it at maybe a 7.5, but if you get to an 8, it's too much. So keep yourself below a 7, a 6.5, and just play there. Feel that pleasure. Find some spots there where it's like enjoyable to touch and play with your penis, your whole body even. That's pleasurable, but you're before that state of arousal, and stay there. Stay there for a while, like playing in that zone that's like arousing but not too arousing. And if you find yourself getting too aroused, slow down and be with the intensity of what that feels like. And just play with what that feels like. Enjoy it, express, make sound, play with all these different areas with yourself. And enjoy that and enjoy that. And, like I said, it could be 10 or 15 minute practice. And then there's a point where you're deciding, okay, I'm going to stop, slow down. Don't just stop suddenly, slow down the touch until there's no touch. And what I think is the most important part is to lie there for a few minutes, 3 minutes, just feeling the arousal in your body, feeling the sensations, the residual sensations. Because, when you've been pleasuring yourself, there's almost like your hands are still there, just feel those sensations that are in around your penis, your groin, your body. And just be really present to them and just be there for a few minutes, just enjoying them, feeling them. And then you can get up and get on with the rest of your day. And this is like bringing you back to home, bringing you back to your sensations and feelings in your body and what's there. And what I found is that when practice this over a period of time, sometimes some guys, I give them this as a practice to do every day for a month. that they are kind of awakened to becoming really clear on their arousal scale and how they move up through that, which means they're much more attuned to their own body and sensations. They find out all these new ways of pleasuring themselves that they never experienced before, that they now really enjoy. They find they're able to be more present in sex with their partners, right? And they get a lot more pleasure from just their masturbation, because they're like, wow, this is so much better than just like doing it in 2 minutes and getting it over and done with. And I don't demonize ejaculation. That's one thing I'm really important on. I don't demonize ejaculation. I just think we should it's good to train ourselves to be able to feel pleasure and not ejaculate as a discipline, to simply go, okay, I can feel this, it's rising. I'm going to bring some consciousness in here and I'm just going to slow down, because that will translate into the sex you have. It'll be much easier for you to do exactly the same thing with a partner, so that you can go from having sex that's 5-10 minutes where you're tense and you're focused on trying to not ejaculate, to where you can feel more relaxed because you're more acquainted with your arousal and you can slow down, and then you can have sex for much longer. And that's not necessarily just to be some champion sex master. It actually allows you to drop deeper and deeper into a connection with your partner, where, you know, you're together, you're feeling each other, you can move in different positions and pleasure each other in different ways. But it also trains you to be with intensity, the intensity of the arousal. You're feeling her feeling as well. If it's a woman that you're sleeping with, I realize I always assume it's a woman on the other side, and I know that's not always the way. But to be with someone else's intensity as well, because there's a training of the nervous system, I believe, and we are training ourselves to be with intensity, whether that's sexual intensity or emotional intensity as well.
I think it's what you're bringing up around this idea of self-pleasure and masturbation, but like bringing yourself up to this level and then not ejaculating or not finishing is so important, particularly for men who are dealing with sex addiction, porn addiction, arousal addiction. Because one of the things that I see so much, and this is something I experienced as well, is the moment you get to a 1 on that scale of 1 to 10, there's this feeling, well, I have to finish. I have to ejaculate. And you can be out in the street and you see an attractive woman and you think, oh, I'm aroused. Okay, I have to go take care of this. As opposed to not being controlled by that and just knowing, hey, I'm aroused, but I don't have to go run to a bathroom and pull out my phone and open up porn so that I can ejaculate. And that, you mentioned the word discipline. That kind of discipline, to have that kind of self-mastery of even getting to a 7 or an 8 and saying, okay, I don't have to bring this to fruition. I don't have to take this all the way. I can just let it kind of cool down, is such a radical act. It's such a transformative, radical shift in perspective to be able to get aroused, but not need to kind of finish or ejaculate or come. So I think it's a beautiful practice, not just for how it impacts your relationship with your partner, but how it impacts your arousal in general in day-to-day life.
Because so many of us are controlled by our arousal and our desire to ejaculate, and it's quite instinctive. You know, I think it's David Data says in his book Where the Superior Man that like men are addicted to ejaculation. So it's like we cut that addiction, and we, as you put it, we have some self-mastery, a new level of self-mastery of ourselves. And, you know, I believe when I practice this, it translated in other areas of my life that I just felt like I had more, I'll use the word power, but like more power over myself in other areas of my life, because I was able to like hold back one of the most kind of primal instincts that we have. I can have control over that, you know, that most primal of instincts. So I was able to translate that into other areas of my life as well.
Yeah. And especially, you know, in this topic of porn addiction, one of the things that I personally experienced, and a lot of the guys listening to this will resonate, is just feeling like you're a slave to your lust, feeling like you're a slave to desire. And the moment you get horny or aroused, it's like it becomes the thing in control. You are no longer in control. It will cause you to run across the street to chase after some woman and ask for her number. Your mind gets consumed by it. But this level of taking back control and saying, oh, okay, it's just arousal. I don't need to let this consume me, I think is really powerful. I'm curious, just kind of last question for you. Is there anything else that you wish we had talked about on this episode?
I wish we had talked about. I think what comes to me, you say that, is relational development. We kind of talked about it in terms of like relationship and developing relationship and conscious relationship. But we have a movement of self-development, which is great. But there's also learning relational development, being in the moment with another. You know, the Imago dialogue is a good example of this. It's like being able to be with another, is an intimate act in itself. You know, that might be eye gazing, that might be breathing together, that might be meditating together. All these kind of relational pieces could be so good for our levels of intimacy in our relationship and the sex that we have. I studied Tantra for a long time, and there's a whole load of steps to tantric sex, 7 or 9, depending on where the school of thought you come from. And the first steps are just like just looking at each other, breathing together, maybe even holding hands and maybe doing some small, gentle movements together, bringing you in tune with each other before you even get into the bed. And like those kind of that relational moments and cultivating those relational moments for us, and practicing those skills as well are so vital for us to have better sex and intimacy and for having, more healthy and connected relationships.
That feels like a wonderful teaser for episode 2 of having you back on the show next time, because I think we could probably have a whole episode around some of these relational connection practices, as you say, some of these tantric practices or conversation practices. It feels like a whole other conversation that we can have. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. Last thing, where can people find out about you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, thank you. The main place to find me is usually Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram. So you can find me there. Probably the other place to really find out more, hear me talk more is on my podcast, The Authentic Man with David Chambers. Those are probably the best 2 places to like learn about me. And if you can contact me through Instagram to do work together. And if you're not on Instagram, which I know a number of people obviously aren't, then my website is www.theauthenticman.net.
Yeah. And I can put my stamp of approval on your Instagram account because it has a lot of really good, juicy topics and infographics and quotes. So, well, David, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your wisdom with my audience. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It's been my pleasure, Jeremy.
All right, everyone. That's it for the show today. Hope you enjoyed this one. We will catch you on the next episode.